there, I'm Erin Shannon and welcome to my southeastern Wisconsin garden. My garden is technically in zone 6A. It's a very skinny little slice of Wisconsin along Lake Michigan that's part of 6A. I think the jury's still out on how accurate that designation is because every winter is a little different, as we know, but we're only about 400 feet from the shore of Lake Michigan. So Lake Michigan is the big thing that determines what the weather here is going to be like. So my garden is, well, the whole property is 1.3 acres, and I probably garden on about 65 or 70% of it, I would say. And I have this garden where I want to have a little bit of everything in it. So the way that I have sort of figured out how to make that make sense in my garden is to kind of create some different zones within the garden, which makes it possible from a maintenance standpoint, but also for me makes it make sense to make it a little bit more cohesive. And generally speaking, the closer you are to the house, the more high maintenance, the more futzy the garden is. And the farther away you get, the more natural it gets, the more free flowing, and the less maintenance there is in it for me. So we're standing here on the patio right by the house. This is where we sit to enjoy the garden. And this garden is full of the highest maintenance plants that are in the garden. Annuals, dahlias, lots of color, lots of different things. I change up this area quite a bit every year. So I do have in this border, I do have some shrubs in here. I've got some tiny tough stuff hydrangeas in here, and I've got Amsonia and a few other shrubs. I've got Kinsley's Ghost, honeysuckle here. But around though that sort of framework, that's where I tuck in dahlias. I love dahlias. I tend to tuck them in around here. Actually, this whole border just gets kind of filled with things. And then that's where I also pop in some annuals. And of course, those things need deadheading and fertilizer and watering. And so since I'm walking past these continuously, it's easy for me to keep up on the maintenance part of things. And I actually enjoy deadheading. It's nice in the middle of summer to have a little job like that. So, I'll be out here in the morning with my coffee or in the evening with a cocktail, deadheading dahlias or, kind of fine tuning little bits of the garden. This front border here, um, the last few years, I've sort of refined this a little bit to try to put in some repeating elements of it. So this year I did 3 of these Mila pineapples to create kind of that repetition, a relatively simple border of just sweet alyssum and mercadonia in the front to bring in some color, because there's a chaos behind this. This is sort of, someone described my garden as like on the edge of chaos, and I can see where that comes from because there is a lot happening behind that with all these different dahlias and things. So by having some repetition and something that is not quite as chaotic in the front, I feel like it makes the border make a little bit more sense. So one of my favorite dahlias, maybe my favorite, always gets kind of the front row here, and that's Crichton Honey. I plant a lot of these here. I probably plant more of those than I do of most other varieties because it's just one of my favorites. I love the ball dahlias. It's peach or yellow. It changes color, gets kind of dark salmon sometimes. Sometimes in fall it'll go almost fully yellow. It's just kind of one of those changing one that works really well. And then this year I did stick in as well Lakeview Peach Fuzz, which is just kind of a funny decorative little dahlia that I thought worked there. And then the other thing that I like to do, obviously, is plant really intensively. So I'm a huge, in addition to dahlias, I have a real weakness for clematis. And so there are clematis growing on almost every shrub in this garden, I think. Very few shrubs are allowed to stand alone. But here I have 3 Hudson River clematis growing here that just scramble throughout this garden. And I just love how it sort of pops up between the hydrangeas and it pops up, kind of climbs up the dahlias. And I always think it's kind of interesting to give shrubs another opportunity to look like they're flowering because some weird flower is growing out. It turns out it's a clematis on them. And it satisfies my need to have as many clematis as possible. So zone 1 is also where I love to have my containers, and container gardening is probably my very favorite part of gardening. It's where I sort of started, and so my heart is close to container gardens, and I really like to kind of go big and bold with containers, and I would say probably this banana depicts that fairly well. It works. So this giant planter. This is a like a 3 foot by 3 foot cube, and I love a big container. I want to jam as many plants as I can into something. And so I love to do something tall here. I feel like it actually helps make the height of our house make a little bit more sense. It kind of brings everything down to garden level. But this is where I get to play around with all those fun annuals and really kind of go over the top. And of course, containers are maintenance hogs. So that's why I like to keep these nice and close. Also, because I like to enjoy them the most, and this is where I get to see them the most. And of course, being by the front door, obviously, I've got lots of containers around here. You know, this is where the big show is when you come to the house, is right up here by the house. I've got a really big window box. Again, I actually got a custom window box made that was extra deep so I could jam even more plants into it. I can't get enough of a lot of plants in a container. And again, we have an all white house. I feel like this is my opportunity to bring in a ton of color. And especially in these northern gardening zones where we have a short season, color is a really, really welcome thing because I feel like we want to soak up all the color and all the joy of summer during that short period of time where we get to enjoy it. So as we start to move away from the house, this is where we start to get into a zone that is a little bit less maintenance than right up next to the house. And this is sort of our zone 2 area. This is primarily perennials, shrubs. There's a few trees in here. These are areas that after things get established, it's mostly, some spring weeding, maybe a little edging and mulching, and maybe a little bit of a visit in fall. And that's about it. Other than, there's a few things I like to do, like, obviously I'll prune out hosta flowers or something like that when they're spent. But beyond that, for the most part, this is an area that is sort of that next backdrop kind of to what else is happening here. And it's not an area that I find myself having to be in often once things are established. A good part of this garden that I'm standing next to actually was one of the first things that I did in this garden. Most of this, not most, many of these things were planted from tiny little plugs. I was a member of an online plant co-op when I first started this garden. And so you didn't get a lot of choice into what you were getting sometimes. And I just didn't care. I just wanted plants. So I have a lot of hostas in here whose names I don't know because I wasn't paying much attention to them at the time. But they have really served me well over the years. And then I filled in more conscientiously over the years, selecting specific plants. I'm a huge fan of texture in the garden, and obviously this is a shady border where texture is really important because there's not as much color differentiation. Shredded umbrella plants is just, I think, an amazing plant, and you couldn't ask for better texture in a garden, especially in a shady border when you're playing against things like hostas and Solomon seal and Aurelia Sun King. But all of those kind of bring this area together into, I feel like, a very richly textured area with a few hints of color where we're able to get it, like with the Japanese painted ferns and things like that. But this is an area that I really enjoy being in, partly because it is pretty low maintenance once things are kind of past that spring push of weeding and making sure things are coming up right. So as I sort of move farther away from the house, and we have a natural division here because we have a little bit of a stream that is running sometimes in spring or when it rains a lot. So I actually create different pathways on one side. So there's a little bit more formal pathway there, and then we just go into gravel pathways on this side, which is sort of another signal that we're entering a more natural part of the garden. And this again is an area that needs, very little maintenance. This is a situation where a little bit of spring And that's usually it. And then I do a chop and drop the following spring. I let everything stand for fall. And I just come in and usually with a string trimmer, just come in and chop everything down. So this part is, I'm looking for really hardworking perennials here. A lot of grasses. I like grasses in the garden, but I've particularly leaned on those in this more natural part of the garden. Deer resistance is really important. We do have a lot of deer here, and I do spray for deer, which does help quite a bit. But when I'm looking to this side of the garden, the farther I get from the house, the more important that deer resistance is because let's be honest, sometime I'm not going to be right on top of the deer spray. So you can't always rely on that. This garden, um, which was designed in conjunction with Roy Diblick, has probably a little bit more color in it at this time than some other parts of this kind of more natural part of the garden. But we're really leaning heavily here on Dischampsia gold tau. And we've got a couple different kinds of alliums here and some coreopsis and some other things growing through here. Um, and I still think it's just as beautiful as the rest of the garden, but it just has a much more natural feel. There's a lot more movement on this side of the garden. And all of this is, like I said, for the most part, really pretty hands off. So when we talk about really tough plants, of course, we start thinking about natives. Now, I've got native plants throughout my garden, but this area in particular is really well suited to those because, again, once you get them established, they can, manage themselves. And there's so many great ones here in the Midwest. We're really spoiled for choice with some really beautiful natives to play off of. So I've got things like Pygnanthemum muticum. We've got Monarda bradburyiana, we've got Joe Pye weed. I mean, the list goes on and on of all the great natives that we can incorporate. And they do lend themselves to that kind of more free-flowing look that I appreciate as we get farther from the house. And that really lends itself to this hands-off, more maintenance-free approach. So in this zone 1 part of the garden, you'll also see some plants that I have in the other zones as well. And that's one of the ways that I bring cohesiveness to a garden that could otherwise maybe be a little bit disparate is by repeating some of those plants that are either plants I really like, plants that offer a nice big pop of color. Like I really like lime green nicotiana. Sometimes I'll actually move that throughout every part of the garden just so that there's a little bit of reference to other parts of the garden. But there are perennials that you will see in each part of this garden as well. And that's the way to make it all work together instead of seeming like 3 unrelated gardens. I wanted a garden that was a little bit of everything. I just wasn't going to decide on one garden style and be happy with that because I like to experiment and play around and I don't want to be limited by just pigeonholing myself into one place. And so the way I did that was to create this zoned approach that is primarily based around maintenance, but also based around, the biggest bang for your buck in the areas that you use the most, and then appreciating a view that's a little bit farther away without having to spend a lot of time maintaining it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this glimpse at my garden. I loved having you here. Thanks so much for coming.